Father Steve Williams here, Saints in the Parish podcast. Happy to have you with us. Joined here with Donald Paul Maddox, co-host, and Donald Paul Maddox has become a father of a second child. So congratulations, Donald Paul. Thomas, is it Thomas the Apostle?
It is Thomas the Apostle. Yeah.
That's the saint I was named after, Thomas the Apostle. Feast of July 3rd. So his feast day is next week. I think next Thursday is his feast day. So we'll keep him in our prayers, particularly on that day, and Julia, his mom, and you as well. So congratulations. So this morning we're going to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, and that may be something that you may have heard a lot about, or you may not have heard a lot about it at all. But I can tell you, it is going to affect all of our lives greatly, greatly. So we need to at least discuss it, and we're discussing it from a theological perspective, okay, from a religious perspective. Now, I also wanted to discuss it from the perspective of Pope Leo and how Pope Leo chose the name Leo, primarily because he really enjoyed a document that was written by Pope Leo the 13th in 1878 called Rerum Novarum. And Rerum Novarum was on really one of the first documents written on social justice, or the teachings about what is social justice in the Catholic Church, the dignity of the human person, on human labor. Or should workers be respected? I mean, that in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, that had not been discussed by any country, any group of people. Here comes the church saying, we need to care about the safety of these workers. We need to think about what industrial, because you got to keep in mind the Industrial Revolution had occurred, right? And that's affecting the whole world, because the Industrial Revolution occurred in the United States of America, which was kind of growing in its dominance in the world. But France was the same thing. It was going on about the same time. The Enlightenment, right? So all of those factors are very important. And so basically here, Pope Leo is saying to us, this is the next chapter of that book. That's how important he considers this to be. So he wants us to really start thinking about what is AI doing for us. Now, I can already tell you AI is doing a lot more than you think it's doing. Okay, you don't even know this. It's involved in a lot of the scam text. AI is involved in a lot of those scams on your phones or your emails. All AI generated. All AI generated. Think about it, okay? And that's really hurting a lot of people. AI is doing some good things, like it's helping radiologists look at an x-ray and point out some particular points that they should look at as it pertains to maybe cancer, which is very helpful to them. So it's doing some good things. So AI is able to scan things exponential, million times faster than we could. Say a typical x-ray. A radiologist could only scan it and look at it. AI can look at it so much faster and so much more detail. So it's no question that it's going to be helpful. And I know many of you may know what AI ChatGPT is, or one of those, that helps you write different things. Like you can just say, hey, write me a story about whatever, and it'll write you a story. And frankly, it does a pretty decent job. So we just have to think about how we're going to use it. Now, Don Paul is here, and we'll talk a little more about, we probably had the same conversation about computers. Maybe we had the same conversation about TVs. Maybe we had this same conversation about telephones, back when they all were invented and we were worried about it. But what are your thoughts on AI?
Yeah, I think, if you look back kind of the history, it's new, specifically in kind of the ways we're using it now. It's certainly, in the last decade, kind of artificial intelligence loosely, goes back, kind of to the beginning of computers, like figuring out, how to run softwares and, things that are kind of happening in the background, specifically like analyzing like financials, like those have been around. IBM had some stuff on that, nothing to the degree that we have now. So I think when a lot of people talk about or think about AI right now, they're really thinking about what they call LLMs, large language models, which is like ChatGPT and Google's Gemini, and
There's like 30 of them or more, probably a ton of them.
that's, I think, typically what people think of now. But obviously, Siri on your phone, Siri is AI. Siri's been around for a decade, so it's a different type of AI. But you've had AI if you have an iPhone, you've had AI on your phone for 10 years.
What's the Amazon one called?
Alexa's AI. So those are it's basically different ways that the developers are training these models. So LLMs are large language models. So basically, it takes billions and billions and billions of data, whatever's inputted from the internet usually, and it trains it to mimic human language, to respond to prompts, all that kind of stuff. And it does a good job of it. Obviously, if you've ever used ChatGPT, it's effective in doing what you're doing.
Didn't they just pass a law recently that's against the law to create like nudity with?
I haven't heard. I hope so. I think they did. Because it can be used for that.
Yeah, I know, and that's another bad thing. Yeah. But I think they passed a law that it's against the law to use it for that. So I don't know how exactly you monitor that, right. But they don't want it being used for that either. Particularly as it pertains to children, they put that in the law.
Yeah. So AI, again, this is not a against AI as a whole. I think the church is also not against AI as a whole. As you see, Pope Leo will certainly be coming out more with more teachings. I'm sure an encyclical or a letter or something's coming in the next maybe year or two, depending on how long it takes. And I don't expect anything, condemning AI. I don't expect it to do anything like that. The church actually did release a document at the beginning of this year on kind of the responsible use of AI. It's a really fascinating document. It's from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith and Education. And it's kind of the same thing we're talking about. AI can be good. It can be helpful for, lifting people out of poverty and helping poor countries to get a leg up. And it can be very helpful for, helping technological advancements, to help people. And that's great. However, where it can be used for good, it can be equally used for bad. More advanced countries can become more advanced at the disservice of poorer countries, and economies that are thriving can become can subject poorer economies to less than human standards. Right. And again, going back to Rerum Novarum, it's the exact same kind of thing, just a different type of technological revolution that is occurring now. So they really do.
Didn't the Holy Father even call this a new revolution or something? He called it, so that he's thinking about this too. So we look forward to that letter or encyclical coming out, and we'll talk about it again. And so we need to do a couple of things. We need to hear your questions, because again, we're not experts on this at all. All we're doing is throwing this out there so that we can discuss it, and we will. So let us hear your questions, or maybe even some of your thoughts. Like, what are your thoughts? Like, how have you found AI to be helpful in your life, or how have you found AI to be harmful in your life? Let us know that. I would be very interested. And one of the things we could do is we could kind of put the list together of like some harmful ways, which is good, because then what happens is we kind of aware of it. We think about it a little bit more. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have probably told a lot of your parents, and especially older people, whatever you do, don't open that text when you get it. Don't click on it. Don't open that email, right? because when you open the email, it gets into your computer. You see what I'm saying? We have to be aware, of that. I mean, I really love the email or the text that you get that says, it comes from someone that again, I don't know how it does that. And it says, would you please go to Walmart and purchase, 4 $100 gift certificates, scratch off the back and take a photo and send them back to me, text them back to me or email them back to me. I mean, I know people that have done it. I mean, obviously it's a scam, and they wouldn't keep doing it if they wasn't making decent money on that. And AI is helping them to get the emails, make a very, very similar email where it looks almost identical to your email with a few little exceptions. So that's harmful. Okay, that's really harmful. So we want to hear from you about what you think about AI. And again, the church's perspective, Pope Leo's perspective, is for the well-being of the faithful. It is for the well-being of humanity. I mean, that is the whole goal. And honestly, even the developers of AI, many of these AI have come out and have said they're a little worried because AI is pretty smart, and it almost is getting to a point where it doesn't need, like, it can develop itself and advance itself. So it doesn't really need, a human person. Right. It's kind of a little scary, isn't it?
Yeah. Cause again, it's, and I think a lot of that document I mentioned earlier, earlier in the year from the church talks about it too, but I imagine that anything that he's going to put out, if he does some catechesis on it or whatever, it's going to be geared first towards developers of AI. So what is their responsibility and those that are actually have a hand in the development, and then obviously the use of it, of who is using it, how to use it. And I think those in tandem are going to be very important because, if I don't want to use AI, like there are some things I can't help, like my phone is doing that all the time. So there's not a whole lot I can do about that, but I can responsibly use it. I can use it for, good purposes and not use it to create anything bad. But also the people that are developing it, I think they need to have some guidance on, yes, we do want you to keep developing technology. Like, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be helpful, but what are the guardrails that need to be put in place for responsible development of it? Like talking about the law, that law about, trying to curtail explicit content or pictures or video or whatever it's creating. Developers can theoretically put guardrails in where that can't even happen. Like, right. It's clearly smart enough that you can say, if this prompt gets put in, it doesn't do that. So there are ways that, I think right now what we're seeing, which is, again, going back to Rome Novarum, is we're kind of at the advent of this technology. And so it's basically all hands on deck. How fast can we go? How far can we go? And you've seen that even with the United States' goal of trying to outcompete China in AI development. Because again, it can be a national security threat, as we know, right, but also to what point do we say, okay, we want to develop it to a certain extent, but these are the areas that we won't touch. We're not going to go here. And right now, I don't think there's a lot of people talking about that. And I think that's what Pope Leo, the church, needs to speak up and say, yes, develop it. Yes, it can be very helpful for poor countries to get a leg up and help in their economies and help their people get better jobs and, safeguard and help them, help their knowledge and help them have more access to technology. But also it can't be used to the detriment of human beings. Right, exactly. So can it help writers for Hollywood create scripts? Of course, like, it can be very helpful for research and helping them get started and getting an outline. It cannot take over their jobs as it already has. We've seen,
and that's what they went on strike for last year.
So you got to have, it's a great kind of paradox and a great balance of how do we use it effectively, but how do we not use it where it starts to abuse people. And again, going back to Rome Novarum with factories and working conditions, and yes, people have an entitlement to good jobs, but not to their own detriment.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're going to make this somewhat interactive because we're going to do another one of these in in a month or two, and we're going to read your comments and ask your questions, and then we'll do some research and we'll get back to you, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, okay? Because it's a great subject. I think we'll be talking about it a whole lot. Now, this is my question. When you look at James or Thomas, which are his two little sons, do you think in terms of, you know, do you think in terms of what their future is going to be like, and so uh, you care greatly like what their future is going to be like, because you know they'll be living hopefully, God willing, for a long time. Does that play a part in when we're thinking about, you know, AI and what AI is going to do for the world? Do we think about our children and grandchildren?
Yeah, absolutely. And even kind of not that far into the future, but my wife is a teacher, and she's actually not only she's an English teacher, so they've got huge problems with AI for education for students. And so I, particularly I guess with my kids too, is we can't substitute human knowledge and human education.
Yeah, that's the problem. We can.
Yeah.
So the the question we should ask ourselves is, should we? Why do I not want my students to use AI to write the paper on The Great Gatsby when or even frankly, I'm not even reading it. I'm just gonna, like the teacher told me to read it and write a paper on it. I'm just gonna let AI write a paper on it.
And grade it. Teachers can use it to grade and to analyze. So it's like AI is using AI.
So why is that so harmful for humanity? That's we have to ask all of these questions. We have to ask, and I ask them in context of students or children or grandchildren, because they're going to have it's going to have a much more greater effect is on them than is necessarily me.
Right. So yeah, so with technology and AI and all that kind of as the world is developing, you know people that are having children and younger families need to specifically think about how that is going to affect them. It's still a problem, but talking about like pornography and that whole thing and how we put up guardrails on the internet, it's going to become even more difficult now because again, you can generate that kind of stuff with AI, and that's no less harmful if it's AI generated. So how do we as families, how do we as people in the pews, how do we as Catholics, you know, not shut ourselves off from technology, and because it can be a very good thing, but how do we as families, as parents, as grandparents, how do we educate our children properly to be able to put guardrails up so that they can't access what they shouldn't access, and then how do we educate them on the proper use of this technology? And so hopefully, again, Pope Leo, the church, we will start kind of really having this conversation about how do we use it, how do we use it effectively, and how do we put guardrails up, and how should we use it and how should we not use it. And I don't think that we've been talking a lot about that because again, everybody's racing to who can do it the best, who can harness it the most, and we're kind of in this space where people are like, okay, we're getting real good at it and we were seeing some problems, and so now maybe we need to figure out how we can put some stops to this.
Sort of did that with you remember that genetically modified cells are trying to clone, and the whole cloning was so popular a decade ago, and all of a sudden I haven't heard too much about it lately because
we're like, oh, that's could be a problem.
We had a few hurdles, and some of it went well and some of it didn't, and so we kind of so thank you. And again, leave us your comments. If you've read something that you really enjoyed about AI, leave us a comment about what that is, and we'll take a look at that. And we will talk about this later. We have a couple of good shows coming up. I will be at a youth camp for a week with our teens, with our youth group, and after that's over, we'll get some of the teens to come back and tell us a little bit about their experiences and how they grew in their spiritual life. So that'll be something we look forward to. So we have a lot of good things to look forward to. So I hope you're having a great summer, And keep Pope Leo in your prayers, and let's pray for each other. So God bless you.